I have a photograph of my now 34-year-old daughter, Libby, when she was about 18 months old. She's wearing a pair of those terry cloth-footed pajamas that toddlers wear, and she's seated before a computer. It was an old-school Mac. Her right hand is on the mouse, and her left hand is holding a baby bottle to her mouth. But that's not the whole picture, because behind my toddler in this photograph stands my mother, who was then about 70 years old. Mom looks on intently as Libby simultaneously operates the new technology and the old technology. It's a picture of the world meeting in incongruous ways. The world collides as generations find each other barely comprehensible. And this time in our world is one of those times when chasms can form between people of good heart and good intent. Now, this was very much the world of the Unitarian martyr Michael Servetus. Born in the early 16th century, Servetus lived in the middle of an information revolution. In Michael Servetus's early life, books were giant folios meant to stand in a library or a monastery. They were copied laboriously by hand or stamped tediously, printed from wood blocks. And as Servetus grew, books were transformed to small portable devices that anyone could carry in a pocket or a handbag. As I say, this was an information revolution. Cultures that had been isolated from each other could all of a sudden engage each other and share information. Books that had been locked away in libraries only to be used by the elite were all of a sudden available for common people to read and ponder. Revolutionary ideas went viral with astonishing speed. Among the amazing texts that destabilized culture were Vesalius's book on human anatomy, Copernicus's book about the nature and workings of the cosmos, and of course that radical, most subversive text that was kept under lock and key, the Bible. Right. Common people were not meant to read it. It was interpreted for the common people by the elite, the priests. But you know, it's hard to suppress the human quest for knowledge. Our thirst for understanding can seem unquenchable. And in a time of technological and cultural revolution, everything seems open to question, open to debate, open to reason. And onto this volatile scene came a curious, brilliant, somewhat arrogant young Spaniard, Michael Servetus. Servetus had studied 8 languages, including Hebrew, and he had pored over copies of the Bible's original texts. He was troubled by mistranslations, but he was a committed, devout Christian. Servetus would have liked his Jewish and Muslim friends to know Jesus and love him too, and he thought any inaccuracies would be stumbling blocks that would get in the way of people becoming Christians. Now, Servetus studied the ancient texts, the New Testament scriptures, and he didn't find any note about the Trinity. He was right. It's not there. Well, Servetus responded to his discovery by deciding that Christianity can do without this troublesome idea of the Trinity. Now think about this. The Trinity is not in Scripture, but it was well-established church doctrine by Servetus's time. Did that bother him? Not at all. And he wrote his first book. It was called On the Errors of the Trinity. You might say Servetus was an arrogant man. He wanted his book to grab people by the lapels and shake them up. His book demanded a response, and he was successful in that. The response from both the Catholic Church and the Protestant reformers was swift, and it was harsh. You remember the 20th century response to Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses? Rushdie was sentenced to death, and he still lives in hiding because he is still hunted by religious zealots. Likewise, Michael Servetus was sentenced to death in absentia, and he was hunted, went into hiding, changed his name to Villeneuve. He was brilliant, he was haughty, he was harsh, he was 19 years old. His book was a bestseller, and Servetus did what so many brilliant and angry young people do. He went to the university. Of course he did. In France, as Villeneuve. He was still being hunted. He studied math, he studied medicine. He had many conversations and debates with his classmates. He became pen pals with some of them, and those relationships lasted for years. Eventually, Servetus became a respected doctor. He was brilliant there too. He discovered pulmonary circulation, and in Spain, there is a hospital named after Michael Servetus for that achievement. On the side, while he practiced medicine, he continued to study his first love, theology. Many bright minds did, and many still do. One of Servetus's fellow students at the university had been a boy from a working-class, blue-collar family, Jean Chauvin. He was a powerful intellect. He was at the university on a scholarship. There's no shame in that. Jean Chauvin was brilliant, he was driven, he was ambitious, and he followed the popular trend to Latinize his name to Johannes Calvinus. Later, he shortened it to John Calvin. And John Calvin became a Protestant minister, and his travels took him to the Protestant city of Geneva, which was a bit of a backwater. The Goldstones say it was more like Cleveland than the cosmopolitan center we think of as Geneva today. Geneva in that era yearned for theological order and discipline, and John Calvin had found a home. Now, some of John Calvin's beliefs won't surprise you if you grew up in certain theological circles. These ideas are still around in the 21st century. John Calvin saw the world as evil and humans as innately sinful. Both were in need of serious discipline. And of course, only God could decide who would be saved and who would be damned. You know that idea that a person might accept Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior? That would have baffled John Calvin and probably enraged him. Only God could decide. In fact, God had decided before the beginning of time, before Adam or Eve or any humans were around to suffer any temptations. God had decided who would be saved. One couldn't affect their own salvation, only live as if they were among God's chosen, those predestined to be among the righteous. Live as if, and hope. So Calvin devised a strict system of rigid controls for Geneva. He hired religious police to punish people for various infractions. You could be punished for things like eating pastry at breakfast, playing a musical instrument at a dance, skating. This one's a personal favorite of mine. The religious police could punish people for talking about business on the way out of church. Yes, that was a sin. You board members and committee chairs put that in your pipe and smoke it. I'm not sure whether smoking was a sin back in the day, but anyway, the most egregious behavior, the most savagely punished infraction was anything that challenged John Calvin or his authority. So consider again this arrogant, abrasive Spaniard, Michael Servetus. He was flint for John Calvin's steel. Remember, Servetus had become a respected doctor, but he was also busy writing another book. It was called The Restoration of Christianity. What a brash idea that Christianity might be in need of restoration. Well, in this new book, Servetus argued against the Trinity again, but that heresy paled in comparison with others. Now remember, heresy simply means choice. The idea that you might have choice in thinking about things theologically is not comfortable for many church leaders. Well, here are some of the heresies that Michael Servetus advanced in the restoration of Christianity. He said people are not born evil, and children aren't even capable of committing mortal sins. Michael had no problem with the divinity of Jesus. He believed God was reflected in every human being, from the most proud elites to the poorest. And Michael Servetus said, nature itself is a reflection of the divine mystery. And since God is already present in all humans and in all nature, here comes a key idea. There was no need for an intermediary between humans and God. No need for priests as go-betweens. Strictly speaking, they didn't even need Jesus. Now, this is an idea that may have occurred to you. It's still, in some church circles, a shocking idea. We can say things like this right out loud. Debate, discuss, put it on the internet. No religious police or come running in the door. But this story of Michael Servetus reminds us, never take religious freedom for granted. Servetus knew how dangerous his ideas were. He did not publish Restoration of Christianity under his own name. His publisher set up a printing press in a cabin hidden in the woods, and they shipped those first copies of Restoration to booksellers in a farm cart hidden under hay bales. They knew this was dangerous stuff. Servetus wasn't surprised when his ideas were swiftly condemned. He just had thought maybe the ideas would not be linked to himself. John Calvin recognized the arguments of his old college friend and pen pal, and he still had to work very hard to get Michael Servetus connected to that book. Ultimately, Servetus was captured, and he was thrown in a Vienna prison and sentenced to die for heresy. But Servetus was crafty and resourceful, and he escaped. He ran for his life. Phew, what a narrow escape. What a relief. I'll bet Michael Servetus stayed far away from John Calvin, right? Right? He had been offered sanctuary in Naples. He was on a journey to travel to Naples where he'd have been safe. And along the way, Michael Servetus decided to settle an old score, and he took an unexpected turn and entered Geneva. And he went to church. He went to John Calvin's church. Did I mention Servetus was an arrogant man? From his high pulpit, John Calvin recognized Servetus. He had him arrested immediately. He threw him into a dank and isolated prison cell from which escape was impossible. And there was a trial, but it was kind of a kangaroo court. And it took months for this spectacle of a trial to unfold. Servetus was denied a lawyer. And when John Calvin, who was listening in, felt the prosecutors weren't treating him harshly enough, he would sweep into the courtroom and argue personally. Servetus was held for the entire many months of the trial in a dark cell infested with rats and lice, with no sanitary facilities. And when they fed him, the rations were meager. The food was often spoiled. He never got a bath or a change of clothes or even a blanket. And by the time he was led to his execution on October 26, 1553, Michael Servetus was a filthy, ragged wreck. They placed a crown of twigs and leaves on his head. They'd infused it with sulfur so that in the heat from the fire, the sulfur would melt and burn his eyes. They built the fire with green wood so that it would slowly roast him. And they stoked the fire with all the known copies, every copy they could find of the restoration of Christianity. Servetus would suffer and die, believing that his ideas might well die with him. And they gave him a last chance. But even in the midst of his agony, Michael Servetus refused to recant. He would not renounce his ideas that everything is holy, everyone is worthy. And so he remains today an example of courage and deep conviction, an early martyr for religious freedom and for Unitarian ideas. He, of course, was not a Unitarian with a capital U. He was not, in any stretch of the imagination, a Unitarian Universalist, but he blazed a trail that made both Unitarianism and Universalism possible. Now, when we're looking at our family tree, it's much easier to find the roots in those New England traditions, Unitarians and Universalists. But those people were indebted to bold reformers like Michael Servetus for their ideas, their convictions that, for instance, the Bible isn't the only source in which God is revealed, that Christianity is not the only true religion, that people should be free to read and interpret religious texts without some expert or intermediary in the way. They were indebted, as we are, for their claim that all humans have inherent worth and dignity, for the view that pleasure is not a sin, and the idea that all of us must seek our own spiritual path in a manner both free and responsible. All these beliefs we tend to take for granted, sometimes in our arrogance. We think we invented them, but they have a long and sometimes painful history. Sometimes our truth claims are so much a part of our secular culture, it's hard to distinguish our faith heritage. Unitarian Universalists, what do they stand for? They don't really believe in anything, do they? Let us never forget we are the heirs of free and open religious inquiry, of questions and doubts and radical faith in humanity and nature. We believe that God, if there be a God, is the source of abiding love and compassion. We stand squarely in the dissenting tradition, and we are stronger whenever we claim our ancestry, however bruised and battered they are, whenever we stand for free thought over the tyranny of inherited dogma. We ourselves are free. We pass the light. Amen. And may it ever be so.